Unit 25. The heading is Civil Disobedience Movement from 1930 to 34. Under this, 25.0 is objectives. That is objectives of this chapter. This unit seeks to discuss the civil disobedience movement launched by the Congress under the leadership of Gandhi during 1930 to 34. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand the circumstances leading to the civil disobedience movement, how the movement was started and what was its program, why the movement was temporarily suspended, why it failed to achieve its goal, and the importance of this movement in Indian history. 25.1 Introduction. In Unit 18 of Block 5, you read about the non-cooperation movement started by the Congress. Though this movement failed to achieve its goal, yet it succeeded in involving millions of people in the movement against the British Raj. After a gap of about 8 years, in 1930, the Congress again gave the call for a mass movement known as the Civil Disobedience Movement. Disobedience spelled Disobedience. The developments in the Indian situation since the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement and the upchanging attitude of the British government to the Indian question prepared the ground for the civil disobedience movement. In this unit, we will discuss the background, the stage-wise development, and finally the failure and consequences of the civil disobedience movement. 25.2 The background. The abrupt withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement by Gandhi after the Chauri Chura incident of February 1922 had demoralizing effect on many Congress leaders and led to a sharp decline in the national movement. Chauri Chura spelled Chauri. The All India Congress membership went down to 106,000 in March 1923 and was only 56,000 in May 1929. The Swarajist program spelled Swarajist of wrecking diarchy from within petered out into council and municipal politicking. Diarchy spelled Dyarchy. The No Changer group, which emphasized upon Gandhian constructive work in villages, remained scattered and kept themselves aloof from the political developments. The remarkable Hindu-Muslim unity of the non-cooperation Khilafat days dissolved into widespread communal riots in the mid-1920s. For example, there was a violent anti-Hindu outburst at Kohat in the northwest frontier province in September 1924. 3 waves of riots in Calcutta between April and July 1926, killed about 138 people. In the same year, there were communal disturbances in Dhaka, Patna, Rawalpindi, Delhi, and UP. Communal organizations proliferated with Hindu sabhas and swarajists, often having virtually identical membership in some places. Negotiations with Jinnah over the Nehru Report plan for an alternative constitution broke down in 1927-28, largely because of Hindu Mahasabha opposition and Jinnah's obstinacy in relation to it. This is end of part 1. We'll continue in part 2. The name of the book is IGNOU, Modern Indian History, 1857 to 1947. The name of the chapter is Unit 24, Revolutionary and Terrorist Movement, Bhagat Singh and Chittagong Armory Raid. The subheading is 24.9. Let us sum up. In this unit, you have studied the two broad strands of revolutionary terrorism which developed in India after 1922. One in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and the other in Bengal. You have also seen how the revolutionaries organized themselves, what was their strategy, and how their actions were backed by an ideology. Revolutionaries spelled REVOLUTIONARIES. Ideology spelled IDEOLOGY. In both regions mentioned above, the revolutionaries were moving away from the idea of individual heroic action to the idea of mass-based armed struggle. Although the movement failed in its stated objective of leading a mass-based armed struggle, but it made a major contribution to the ongoing national struggle against colonialism. Colonialism spelled COLONIALISM. The courage, sacrifice, and patriotism of the revolutionary terrorists inspired the Indian youth and restored their pride and self-confidence. 24.10 Keywords. Adult franchise. Franchise spelled FRANCHISE. The meaning of which is the right to vote to all citizens of the age of 21 and above. Communism spelled COMMUNISM, meaning of which is final stage of history as Marx analysis which visualizes a classless society. The next word is martyrdom spelled MARTYRDOM, the meaning of which is a condition which causes suffering or death of a person for a cause. The next word, Marxism, spelled MARXISM, the meaning of which is a body of ideas propounded by Marx. He emphasized the role of productive forces in relation to society, polity, and culture, in shaping the development of society. Polity spelled Polity. The next word is revolutionary terrorist movement, the meaning of which is a movement which aims to bring about social change through violent acts intended to terrorize. The next word is socialism, spelled Socialism, the meaning of which is a stage in transition to communism which calls for dictatorship of proletariat under whose control resources and wealth can be equitably distributed. Proletariat spelled Proletariat. The next subheading 24.11 Answers to check your progress exercises. Check your progress 1. Your answer should include the following points: the growth of socialist ideas and groups, the rise of militant trade union movement, and the rise of Soviet Republic. For this, see section 24.2. Number 2. Your answer should include the following points: to organize an armed revolution against colonial rule, to establish a federal republic elected on the basis of adult franchise, etc. See section 24.3. Number 3. Your answer should include the following points: it was being influenced by socialist ideas. It was moving towards the idea of mass-based armed struggle, etc. See section 24.4. Check your progress 2. Under this, number 1 is your answer should include the following points: it evolved a program within a broad socialist, democratic, and secular framework to establish a federal republic by armed revolution, to preach social revolutionary principles, etc. See subsection 24.5.1. Number 2. Your answer should include the following points: turned towards Marxism and socialism, abandoned belief in terrorism and individual heroic action, believed that broad, popular, mass-based movements could liberate India, etc. See subsection 24.5.2. Number 3. Bijoy Sinha, Shiv Verma, etc. See subsection 24.5.2. Check your progress 3, under which number 1 is your answer should include the following points: started large-scale terrorist propaganda in the press and developed underground activities, continued to work in the Congress organization from the village to provincial levels because they realized that Congress had a mass base, accepted the strategy of national liberation by mass armed uprisings, etc. See section 24.6. Number 2. Your answer should include the following points: sections of bureaucracy, police and army came under the influence of the Chittagong Armory raid. More and more people, including women, joined the revolutionary movement, etc. See section 24.7. Chittagong spelled Chittagong. Bureaucracy spelled Bureaucracy. Number 3. Your answer should include the following points. The mainstream of national movement was opposed to terrorism, death of many of the revolutionary leaders, government repression, etc. See section 24.8. With that, we finish Unit 24. Unit 25. The heading is Civil Disobedience Movement from 1930 to 34. Under this, 25.0 is objectives. That is objectives of this chapter. This unit seeks to discuss the civil disobedience movement launched by the Congress under the leadership of Gandhi during 1930 to 34. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand the circumstances leading to the civil disobedience movement, how the movement was started and what was its program, why the movement was temporarily suspended, why it failed to achieve its goal, and the importance of this movement in Indian history. 25.1 Introduction. In Unit 18 of Block 5, you read about the non-cooperation movement started by the Congress. Though this movement failed to achieve its goal, yet it succeeded in involving millions of people in the movement against the British Raj. After a gap of about 8 years, in 1930, the Congress again gave the call for a mass movement known as the Civil Disobedience Movement. Disobedience spelled Disobedience. The developments in the Indian situation since the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement and the upchanging attitude of the British government to the Indian question prepared the ground for the civil disobedience movement. In this unit, we will discuss the background, the stage-wise development, and finally the failure and consequences of the civil disobedience movement. 25.2 The background. The abrupt withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement by Gandhi after the Chauri Chura incident of February 1922 had demoralizing effect on many Congress leaders and led to a sharp decline in the national movement. Chauri Chura spelled Chauri. The All India Congress membership went down to 106,000 in March 1923 and was only 56,000 in May 1929. The Swarajist program spelled Swarajist of wrecking diarchy from within petered out into council and municipal politicking. Diarchy spelled Dyarchy. The No Changer group, which emphasized upon Gandhian constructive work in villages, remained scattered and kept themselves aloof from the political developments. The remarkable Hindu Muslim unity of the non cooperation Khilafat days dissolved into widespread communal riots in the mid 1920s. For example, there was a violent anti Hindu outburst at Kohat in the northwest frontier province in September 1924. Three waves of riots in Calcutta between April and July 1926 killed about 138 people. In the same year, there were communal disturbances in Dhaka, Patna, Rawalpindi, Delhi, and UP. Communal organizations proliferated with Hindu sabhas and swarajists often having virtually identical membership in some places. Negotiations with Jinnah over the Nehru Report plan for an alternative constitution broke down in 1927-28 largely because of Hindu Mahasabha opposition and Jinnah's obstinacy in relation to it. This is end of part 1. We'll continue in part 2. The name of the book is IGNOU Modern Indian History 1857 to 1947. Unit 25. The name of the chapter is Civil Disobedience Movement 1930 to 34. Part 2. I will be continuing subheading 25.2 Background. The Hindu-Muslim unity of 1919 to 1922 was never regained, but otherwise there were many signs of the growth of anti-imperialist movement from 1928 onwards. These signs were visible in 1. Demonstrations and hartals in towns in the course of the boycott of the Simon Commission. Hartals spelled HARTALS. 2. Militant communist-led workers movement in Bombay and Calcutta, which alarmed Indian businessmen and British officials and capitalists alike. 3. The revival of revolutionary groups in Bengal and northern India with Bhagat Singh's HSRA introducing a new secular and socialistic tone. 4. Peasant movements in various regions, particularly the successful Bardoli Satyagraha led by Vallabhbhai Patel in Gujarat in 1928 against the enhancement of land revenue. Bardoli spelled Bardoli. Vallabhbhai spelled Vallabhbhai. During this period, when the Congress left was emerging under Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Bose slogans of Purna Swaraj rather than of only dominion status were voiced. See Unit 26. After much hesitation, Gandhi accepted this change in Congress Creed at the Lahore session in December 1929, setting the stage for the next major round of countrywide struggle in 1930 to 34. You would like to know how this new upsurge became possible, considering the extent of decline and fragmentation of the immediately preceding years. Historians of the Cambridge School have tried to explain it by suggesting a direct causal link between the British policies and the ups and downs of the national movement. The appointment of Simon Commission revived a moribund nationalism. Moribund spelled Moribund. Irwin gave the Congress importance by talking with Gandhi on a level of equality. But a closer look raises doubts about this entire thesis, for British policies often changed in response to nationalist pressures rather than vice versa. Irwin spelled Irwin. For example, the all white Simon Commission had planned a retreat even from the Montagu Chelmsford framework in respect of the demands of Indians. Montagu Chelmsford spelled Montagchelmsford. But the mass upsurge of 1930 forced the British to make a promise of some sort of responsible government at the center. Further, it was the pressure from the national movement and the heroic self sacrifice of people which again forced Irwin to negotiate with Gandhi in February March 1931. Throughout 1928 and 1929, we find that political and economic tensions between British domination and a variety of Indian interest increased. 1. Contradictions were enormously sharpened by the impact of the World Depression, which set in from late 1929. Business groups were not happy with the British tariff policy. Lancashire textile imports were going up again, and there were growing conflicts in Calcutta between the Birlas and British jute interest, and in Bombay over coastal shipping. 2. The workers, facing large scale retrenchment, started agitations which unprecedented militancy and organization. Retrenchment spelled Retrenchment. 3. Rural tensions were sharpened by stagnation in agrarian production and by British efforts to enhance land revenue in Rayatwari areas in the late 1920s. Rayatwari spelled Raiyatwari, till the Bardoli victory halted such endeavors permanently. But socio-economic tensions did not necessarily or automatically take anti-British turn, for the immediate oppressors would most often be Indian zamindars, moneylenders, or mill owners, groups which could have nationalist connections or which nationalists generally try to keep on their side. Yet, a massive countrywide upsurge did take place in 1930. Let us see why and how it happened. Check your progress. 1. Under this, number 1 is what were the developments in Indian politics from 1928 onwards that prepared the stage for the civil disobedience movement? Answered in about 100 words. 2. Which of the following statements is right or wrong? I will read out these statements to you. There are 4 statements. They are headed A, B, C, and D. A. During the post-non-cooperation period, a Congress left was emerging under Subhash Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru's initiative. Right or wrong? B. The resolution for Purna Swaraj was taken at the Lahore session of the All India Congress in 1929. Right or wrong? C. The socio-economic tensions were sharpened by the impact of the World Depression. Right or wrong? And D. The socio-economic tensions automatically led to anti-British agitation. Right or wrong? Subheading 25.3, which is Civil Disobedience 1930 to March 1931. The Lahore Congress in bracket 1929 had left the choice of the precise methods of non-violent struggle for Purna Swaraj to Gandhi. It was resolved that a manifesto or pledge of independence would be taken all over India by as many people as possible on 26th of January 1930. On this day, civil disobedience was supposed to commence. It was declared Independence Day. Under this, subsection 25.3.1, Gandhi's efforts. Gandhi was still not sure of his plan of action. Before launching the movement, he once again tried for compromise with the government. He placed 11 points of administrative reform and stated that if Lord Irwin accepted them, there would be no need for agitation. The important demands were: 1. The rupee sterling ratio should be reduced to 1s/4d. 2. Land revenue should be reduced by half and made a subject of legislative control. 3. Salt tax should be abolished and also the government salt monopoly. 4. Salaries of the highest grade services should be reduced by half. 5. Military expenditure should be reduced by 50% to begin with. 6. Protection for Indian textiles and coastal shipping. 7. All political prisoners should be discharged. To many observers, this charter of demands seemed a climb down from Purna Swaraj. Jawaharlal Nehru wrote in his autobiography, "What was the point of making a list of our political and social reforms when we were talking in terms of independence?" Did Gandhiji mean the same thing when he used this term as we did, or did we speak a different language? The government's response to Gandhi's proposal was negative. Still, Gandhi was hesitant. he wrote to the Viceroy. But if you cannot see your way to deal with these evils, and my letter makes no appeal to your ear, I shall proceed with such co-workers of the ashram as I can take to disregard the provisions of the salt laws. I regard this tax to be the most ubiquitous of all from the poor man's standpoint. The Viceroy gave a brief reply in which he regretted that Gandhi was contemplating a course of action which was clearly bound to involve violation of law and danger to the public peace. Gandhi, in his rejoinder, said, "On bended knees I asked for bread and received a stone instead. The English nation responds only to force, and I am not surprised by the vice-regal reply." Subsection 25.3.2 Beginning of the movement. Gandhi took the decision to start the movement on 12th March 1930. Gandhi started the historic march from his Sabarmati ashram to Dandi beach, accompanied by his 78 selected followers. There, Gandhi and his followers broke the law by manufacturing salt from the sea. The program of the movement was as follows. A. Salt law should be violated everywhere. B. Students should leave colleges and government servants should resign from service. C. Foreign clothes should be burnt. D. No taxes should be paid to the government. E. Women should stage a dharna at liquor shops, etc. The choice of salt as the central issue appeared puzzling initially. Events quickly revealed the enormous potentialities of this choice. You planned a fine strategy round the issue of salt, Irwin later admitted to Gandhi. Salt was a concrete and a universal grievance of the rural poor, which was almost unique in having no socially divisive implications. With regard to food habits, salt was a daily necessity of the people. It also carried with it the implications of trust, hospitality, mutual obligations. In this sense, it had a far reaching emotional content. Moreover, the breaking of the salt law meant a rejection of the government's claims on the allegiance of the people. In coastal areas where over the previous century indigenous salt production had been ruined by British imports, illegal manufacture of salt could provide the people a small income which was not unimportant. The manufacture of salt also became a part of Gandhian methods of constructive work like khadi production. Rural Gandhian bases everywhere provided the initial volunteers for the salt satyagraha. Above all, Dandi March and the subsequent countrywide violation of the salt law provided a tremendously impressive demonstration of the power of non-violent mass struggle. This is end of part 2. We'll continue in part 3. The name of the book is IGNOU Modern Indian History 1857 to 1947, Unit 25. The name of the chapter is Civil Disobedience Movement 1930 to 34, Part 3, Subsection 25.3.2, Beginning of the Movement. I am continuing from where I left off in Part 2. What came to be undermined was the entire moral authority of the government and its self-image of being paternalistic Maibap of the poor. An additional district magistrate reported from Midnapuri, Bengal, in November 1930 that even old villagers were talking insolently. The ordinary cultivator simply squatted on his haunches and laughing sarcastically said, "We know how powerful the Sarkar is." Subsection 25.3.3. Movement spreads. Social boycott of police and lower level administrative officials led to many resignations. That the British realized the gravity of the threat was revealed by the sheer brutality of repression, as unresisting men were methodically bashed into a bloody pulp, in the words of the American journalist Webb Miller. But the spectacle of unarmed, unresisting satyagrahis standing up to abominable torture aroused local sympathy and respect as nothing else could have done. The brutal repression invoked memories of innumerable acts of petty oppression by police and local officials, linking up the All India struggle with the day-to-day experiences of the villagers. Sympathy quickly turned into participation, spreading the movement far beyond the fairly narrow confines, and such participation often took violent forms with crowds of villagers attacking police parties. The Gandhian restraints had been weakened anyway by the early removal of most of the Congress cadres by arrest. While the salt satyagraha was at its height, British alarm was deepened by three major outbursts outside or going beyond the confines of Gandhi's civil disobedience. The first one, on 18th April 1930, Bengal revolutionaries inaugurated the most powerful and heroic epoch in the history of the terrorist movement by seizing the Chittagong Armory and fighting a pitched battle on Jalabad Hill on 22nd April. Revolutionary terrorism accompanied the whole history of civil disobedience in Bengal, with 56 incidents in 1930 as compared to 47 for the decade 1919 to 1929. The Chittagong leader Surya Sen managed to remain underground in villages till as late as 1933, and there was the evidence of a new level of peasant sympathy. For the first time, Muslims were also included in what had been a movement of educated middle class Hindu youth alone. 2. In Peshawar on 23rd April 1930, the arrest of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan provoked a massive upsurge, and a platoon of Garhwal rifles in bracket Hindu soldiers facing a Muslim crowd refused to open fire, an instance of patriotic self-sacrifice, non-violence, and communal unity, which often serves to be better remembered. 3. The industrial city of Sholapur in Maharashtra in early May 1930 saw a textile workers' strike, attacks on liquor shops, police outposts and government buildings, and even something like a parallel government for a few days. The onset of the monsoon made illegal salt manufacture difficult, and the Congress switched over to other forms of mass struggle, all characterized by a similar pattern of careful choice of socially non divisive issues, followed by their broadening and radicalization through a variety of populist initiatives. The Working Committee in May 1930 sanctioned non payment of and revenue in Rayatwari areas, an anti Chaukidari tax in Zamindari regions, and forest satyagraha, peaceful violation of forest laws restricting age old tribal and poor peasant rights to free fodder, timber, and other forest produce. The government struck back at no tax movements through large scale confiscations of property, yet thousands of peasants heroically stood their ground, at times migrating en masse to neighboring princely states. Rural movement repeatedly went beyond the prescribed Gandhian bounds through violent confrontations with the police at many places and massive tribal invasions of forests in central provinces, Maharashtra, and Karnataka. The rumor spread that the British Raj was coming to an end. Subsection 25.3.4 Response of different sections. Urban intelligentsia support for Gandhian nationalism was perhaps less in evidence in 1930 than during the non-cooperation movement, and there were few instances of lawyers, students leaving official institutions to join national schools. Militant urban educated youth tended to be attracted more by revolutionary terrorism in Bengal and in North Indian towns. Bhagat Singh's popularity briefly rivaled that of Gandhi himself. The most obvious weak point of nationalism as compared to 1919-1922 was of course Muslim participation, which remained low on the whole except in Badshah Khan's northwest frontier province and places like Delhi. For example, only 9 out of 679 civil disobedience prisoners at Allahabad between 1930 and 33 were Muslims. Social discontent turned communal in Dhaka town and Kishorganj village in May and July 1930, and there were large scale riots in Kanpur in March 1931, soon after the Gandhi Irwin Pact. Unlike non cooperation, civil disobedience did not coincide with any major labor upsurge. There were frequent hartals in towns, but the Congress did not include industrial or communication strikes in its program, much to the relief of the British officials. Such lags were largely made up by the massive peasant mobilization and considerable support from business groups, at least during the early months of civil disobedience. The movement, unlike non cooperation, implied violations of law arrests and beatings up right from the beginning, and the number of jail goers were 92,214, more than three times the 1921 to 22 figure. Support from Ahmedabad mill owners, Bombay merchants, and petty traders in bracket industrialists in the city being less enthusiastic, and Calcutta Marwaris headed by G.D. Birla can be cited as examples of the solidarity of the capitalist with the national movement at this stage. For example, the merchants in many towns took a collective pledge to give up import of foreign goods for some months. Combined with picketing and the overall impact of the depression, there was a spectacular collapse of British cloth imports from 1,248 million yards in 1929-30 to only 523 million yards in 1930-31. A novel and remarkable feature of the civil disobedience movement was the widespread participation of women. The handful of postgraduate women students in 1930s still went to class escorted by their teachers, and yet there were women from far more socially conservative professional, business, or peasant families picketing shops, facing lathis, and going to jail. A UP police official felt that the Indian woman is struggling for domestic and national liberty at the same time. However, this sudden active role of women in politics did not produce any significant change in the conditions of women in or outside the family. Gandhian non-violence, after all, did not entail any drastic violation of the traditional image of women. Rather, it was male action that had, in some ways, been feminized through the emphasis upon self sacrificing acceptance of suffering. The deeply religious ambience of Gandhi's saintly image was perhaps even more crucial. Joining the Congress movement was a new religious mission, and certain transgressions were permitted, even glorified in such a context. Just as Mira, centuries back, had come to be venerated as a saint, the one form of women's participation which came to be quite sharply condemned was an active role in direct terrorist action, including assassination, has happened several times in Bengal. Even Rabindranath Tagore, usually much in advance of others in question of women's roles, then wrote a novel, Char Adhyay in bracket 1934, condemning such unfeminine behavior. Subsection 25.3.5 Regional Variations. The recent spate of regional studies of civil disobedience has brought to light interesting variations and internal tensions. Gujarat, more specifically Kheda district, Bardoli Taluka of Surat, Ahmedabad, and the Gujarati business cum professional community of Bombay city had become the classic heartland of controlled mass mobilization through Gandhian satyagraha. Gandhian strategies and controls fitted in well with the interest of substantial land holding peasants like the patidars of Kheda and Bardoli, where in the absence of big zamindaris, rent was not much of an issue. Patidars spelled Patidars, Kheda spelled Kheda. Rural movements tended to be more uninhibited where Congress organization was weaker or where internal zamindar peasant divisions were quite sharp. Thus, in central provinces, Maharashtra or Karnataka, where non cooperation had made little inroads, the Gandhian ideas had the flavor and vagueness of novelty. A near millenarium flavor could still be seen, absent in the well established strongholds like Gujarat, coastal Andhra, or Bihar. In the United Provinces, district level comparisons have brought out clearly this inverse relationship between organization and militancy. Parts of Agra district with a strong Congress organization and few big zamindars followed the Bardoli pattern. Talukdar dominated Rai Bareli saw powerful pressures from the peasants. In Barabanki, where Kadi or Charka were little in evidence, local activists were preaching that land was a gift of God and could not belong to zamindars alone. In Bengal, with its relatively weak and faction ridden Congress, a near coincidence of class with communal divisions in the eastern districts and the presence already of a left alternative, the pattern was even more complex. There were powerful Gandhian rural movements in parts of West Bengal like Midnapur, Arambagh subdivision, and Bankura. A Praja movement was developing among Muslim rich peasants, which was aloof or hostile regarding civil disobedience, and in one Muslim majority district, Tipera, Congress activists were combining agrarian radicalism with nationalism in ways branded as rank Bolshevism by government officials and local Hindu landlords. With that, I end part 3 and will continue in part 4. The name of the book is IGNOU Modern Indian History 1857 to 1947. The name of the chapter is Unit 25 Civil Disobedience Movement 1930 to 34, Part 4. Check your progress 2. Number 1 under that is what was Gandhi's proposal to Lord Irwin before starting the movement? What were its consequences? Answer in about 100 words. Number 2. What was the program of the civil disobedience movement? Answer in about 5 lines. Number 3. Why was salt chosen as the central issue of the movement? Answer in about 50 words. Number 4. Give your answer in one sentence for the following questions. Question 1. What do you understand by forest satyagraha? Question 2. What was the government's response to no tax movements? Question 3. What was the basic difference between the non-cooperation and the civil disobedience movement? Section 25.4. The truce months March to December 1931. Around September-October 1930, civil disobedience entered a second, more contradictory phase. Pressures for no rent were mounting as the Depression began having its major impact, and the UP Congress had to reluctantly sanction non payment of rent in October. Incidents of poor peasant and tribal militancy and violence multiplied in many areas. At the same time, official reports began speaking of a marked decline of enthusiasm and support among urban traders, many of whom started breaking earlier pledges not to sell imported goods. Thakurdas warned Motilal Nehru that the capacity of the commercial community for endurance had reached its limits, and industrialists like Homi Modi denounced the frequent hartals which dislocated trade and industry. Homi Modi spelled Homimody, possibly the enthusiasm of substantial peasants in the face of ruthless British seizure of property had started flagging too. Almost all leading Congress leaders were put behind bars. This was probably the context for Gandhi's rather sudden retreat. He initiated a talk with Irwin on 14th February 1931, which culminated in the Delhi Pact of 5th March. The pact is popularly called Gandhi-Irwin Pact. The salient features of this accord were: 1. The agreement arrived at the first Round Table Conference shall further be deliberated upon in another Round Table Conference. 2. The Indian National Congress will withdraw the civil disobedience movement immediately and effectively in all respects. 3. The boycott of British goods would also be withdrawn forthwith. 4. The government agreed to withdraw ordinances promulgated in relation to the civil disobedience movement. Those political prisoners against whom there were no allegations of violence were to be set free, and penalties that had not been realized were to be remitted. Indemnities would be paid to those who had suffered in the movement. 5. The government was neither to condone breach of the existing law relating to salt administration, nor would the Salt Act be amended. Nonetheless, government was to permit the collection and manufacture of salt freely to the people living within a specified area from the seashore. The Congress Working Committee was divided when it met on the 5th of March 1931 to discuss the results of the talks. Many people hailed it as a victory because the Viceroy had to negotiate a settlement. Others were not happy. Gandhi agreed to attend the Round Table Conference, more or less on British terms, in sharp contrast to his stand up till the end of January 1931. Even Gandhiji's request for remitting the death sentence on Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru was turned down by the Viceroy, and they were executed on 23rd March. Civil disobedience had died a sudden death, ending not with a bang but a whimper, as Nehru wrote in his autobiography a few years later. The Gandhi-Irwin Pact had ambiguous consequences. Many others besides Nehru felt dismayed by the unexpected halt long before attaining the proclaimed goal of Purna Swaraj, and peasants who had sacrificed land and goods at the Congress' behest must have felt particularly let down. There was even a black flag demonstration against Gandhi when the Karachi Congress opened a few days after the execution of Bhagat Singh. The session, however, ratified the new policy, with Nehru having spent more sleepless nights moving the key resolution accepting the Delhi Agreement. More fundamentally, it can be argued that the truce meant the loss of some crucial months during which the Congress restrained no tax and no rent movements, precisely when rural discontent was at its height, with the Depression having its initial impact and when sheer economic distress had not as yet ruined the potential for large scale struggle. The Congress did give the call for no tax again in January 1932, but by that time the psychological moment had gone. Gandhi's entry into the second round table conference also proved a virtual fiasco. The first conference, in January 1931, with civil disobedience still at large and the Congress boycotting it, had been marked by Ramsay MacDonald's novel offer of responsible government at the center. But its two characteristics were a federal assembly on which princes who joined would nominate their own members and a series of reservations and safeguards to maintain British control over defense, external affairs, finance, and economy. Having accepted this as the framework for discussion, Gandhi, as sole Congress representative at the second Round Table Conference, found himself involved in endless squabbles with Muslim leaders, the scheduled caste representative Ambedkar, who had started demanding separate electorates for untouchables and princes. The British watched this gleefully. The Congress had clearly been outmaneuvered, yet the impact of the pact and truce months was not entirely negative. The British, after all, had to negotiate with Gandhi on terms of equality and courtesy for the first time, and this was something deeply resented by many die-hard officials. The released congressmen seemed to have gone back to their villages and towns with undiminished confidence, almost as victors. The Congress organization expanded rapidly in the countryside, and the general mood was quite different from the fragmentation and decline after 1922. The Congress, in fact, was seeking to establish itself as the alternative, more legitimate center of authority, starting arbitration courts to settle local disputes and trying to mediate in zamindar riot conflicts. Meanwhile, popular pressures were also building up in many areas, most notably no rent agitation in the United Provinces, which the Provincial Congress eventually permitted in December 1931. A powerful anti Maharaj movement in Kashmir under Sheikh Abdullah was an indication that political unrest was reaching out to princely states. In bracket, there was to be a revolt in Alwar 2 years later, close bracket, even though the Congress leadership still refused to intervene in princely India. This was the overall context for the British decision of a preemptive strike against the Congress before it got any stronger, taken by the new right wing national government and Viceroy Wellington in late 1931. The new policy has been described as one of civil martial law in bracket D/A law, sweeping ordinances banning all Congress organizations on 4th of January 1932, abrogating all civic freedom without formally declaring a military rule, in order to force the Congress to wage an unequal and defensive battle. Abrogating spells abrogating. On the 4th of January 1932, a fresh batch of Congress leaders, including Gandhi and Sardar Patel, were arrested. Now, attempts to treat political prisoners as common criminals became more common than ever before. With that, I end part 4.